Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. My name is Nils Vinje, and today my guest is Sam Gurdus. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here.
I'm excited to dig into all things leadership with you, Sam. But first, before we get started, would you share with me and our audience the role that you're in today and the company that you work for?
Absolutely. So the role that I'm in today is I lead our customer success organization at Mezmo. That means I oversee our support engineering team, our customer success managers, our renewals operations, as well as a solutions architect role, dealing with everything, after the sale, making sure our customers are successful. And then Mezmo, in particular, we essentially offer like a pretty flexible solution that centralizes log data for engineers or anyone that's really developing a product. We help enhance visibility and mitigate incident response, and ultimately offer a pipeline to process, normalize, and correlate all of your critical log data before routing it downstream.
Wow. Okay, so I got to imagine that log data is pervasive across our technology-based world today. So does Mezmo literally apply to any application or any company using data, building systems, all that kind of stuff, because you're always going to have logs? Or are there particular disciplines where you focus and go deeper to serve your customers with a specific use case or a specific industry vertical?
Yeah, it's pretty much industry and vertical agnostic. We can work with any customer, even if you are in the financial or health fields, and there's kind of certain compliance or security needs that you have. We're good to go with just about any organization. I'd say the end consumers who really benefit the most from working with Mezmo are your site reliability engineers, your developers, anybody who's really kind of building and leans on those logs in order to ensure that their customers' experience is as ideal as possible. So help catch, mitigate issues ahead of time, debug, and then ultimately troubleshoot if you do miss an issue in your code that goes and is released into production.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's cool that you run the customer success side of the house. So your job is to ensure that your customers are successful, and your product actually ensures that your customers' customers are successful. So there's a long chain of success there, and I think that's incredible alignment and really cool to see. It just doesn't always happen.
Yes,
it's great.
No. It can be meta at times. The
Exactly.
levels of customer success that is happening.
Right. Absolutely. So Sam, you and I got actually connected way back in, I think it was 2015 or so, or 2016, early around that time. And it was around right before you got into the world of Segment. And I had done some work with Segment when they were just an A and B round funded company. And then you came in to take over the team. So it was really cool just reconnecting with you and talking about Segment. Maybe we'll just talk a little bit about this briefly before we go even further back in time. But what was it like coming into Segment at the point at which you did? We know it went on, a pretty significant continued growth from that stage. But we'd love to hear just a little commentary about what it was like joining an organization that eventually, a few years later, exited at $3.2 billion. It was kind of an amazing success story.
Yeah, and it was wonderful connecting with you then, and great to reconnect now. I mean, the time that I joined Segment, we were probably crossing around the 50 to 60 kind of employee mark, and it was a pretty critical period. And I'd say that experience was really formative for me in that I had already had a good amount of experience under my belt working with a hyper growth company that was going through a lot of changes at that organization. 15 people when I started and exited at about 600 people.
Wow.
So seeing that again, then going through a version of that again with Segment was really interesting. And I said it was formative in that the type of people that I got to work with there, it was a really, really special place. Not only were people genuinely curious and wanting to contribute and really putting customer and company before themselves, it was just an environment where people really were comfortable challenging one another, and there was a tremendous amount of trust, I think, that we built together in those early years. So it was a pretty unique environment, in my experience at least, where you have that awesome combination of a tremendous amount of intelligence, balanced with humility and that genuine, desire to learn. And people didn't kind of say, "Oh, I have all the expertise, so listen to me, I know everything." It was really, "Hey, I have an opinion, and I would really love to make sure that I'm gauging that opinion and evolving that opinion based on other people's input." So it was a very special place, and I think was probably the root or the crux of why they were such a successful organization, and they eventually had such a tremendous exit. I really believe it's the type of people that we were able to bring in.
I agree. And so my time with Segment was just the year prior to when you joined, and I noticed the exact same thing, right? And I was just always blown away. Peter Reinhardt was one of the founders. There were 4 founders, and then he was the CEO. But he was a CEO, first-time CEO from the beginning, from the founding time, all the way through the $3.2 billion exit to Twilio. And what just always astonished me was the just professionalism and just level-headedness that he had growing this organization and building a culture exactly like what you just described. Forever thoroughly impressed with the work of Peter and the entire leadership team, because that is no small feat, especially when the pressures of investors and pressures of the market and, ups and downs and swings and all those things. And to come out with a culture of people who are, tremendously genuine, willing to have strong debates, willing to confront each other, but still be incredibly tight and just, be a fun place to be. It literally was a very fun office to work in when I went to go on site there. And it was a blast. And I just, always impressed with how well that turned out.
Yeah, Pete, and you brought up Peter Reinhardt. I mean, what a special leader in his own right. Again, a very, very intelligent person, and that could easily make you feel like you are the smartest or best person in the room. That was never the case with Peter. Really good listener, really honest, open, transparent. He called out his own areas of opportunity where he could improve, and he really worked at them, and it was inspiring. And I think it led other people to feel comfortable and humbled to be able to work on their own areas of improvement. So he certainly set the tone for the organization. I learned a lot from him just watching.
Same here. And I had relatively a few interactions with him just from the CS and working with the CS team as a consultant, but it was always evident. It was always clear kind of how that behavior stemmed all the way through the culture. And that is just great reminder of what's possible, especially in the early stages of just how much of your culture is formed by the founding team and how dictated it is by the patterns and behaviors and things that you see all the time.
And quick plug for him, not to act as if I'm the president of his fan club, but he's a great Twitter follow.
Oh, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Say that again.
He's a great Twitter follow. So if you follow him on Twitter, yes. he really recounts a lot of his experiences and the company's experiences and gives praise and credit where credit is due. It's interesting to just relive or even learn for the first time from some of his stories that he recounts. So good stuff.
That's awesome. That's so good. That's so good. Yeah. And Peter, if you're listening, you got 2 major fans in your club. Of course, you got a lot more, but Sam and I are here to sing the praises. So thanks for the opportunity to work with you way back when. It was a blast. And we both, that was one of the reasons why we connected, was Segment in the very beginning. All right, Sam. So let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk more about you. And would love to hear about how you got into your very first leadership position.
Yeah, that was certainly an interesting opportunity. So prior to Segment, I worked at an organization called AdRoll. I joined AdRoll really, really early on, coming from a much larger, more structured organization with the desire to have a little bit more, or really a lot more impact on the product and on the growth of the company. So I came in an individual contributor role, kind of an ad ops manager type function, and pretty quickly, I think within less than a year, somebody saw something in me. We're going back to like 2010 now. So if I had a beard, there were definitely less grays in the beard, and there was no Uber, so I was taxiing everywhere if they would pick me up. Different time, and leadership there. I think they saw some potential, because at that time I definitely did not know how to do things like effectively connect the team's output to the business outcomes that we need. I wasn't able to grasp a lot of those concepts, but I think I understood them and saw them, but I didn't know how to showcase. So I think I was, kind of certainly working hard, understood my product to a deep, deep detail. I was always doing research to learn more about the industry and see where I can help augment our value that we were offering to customers. So I think that was stuff that was in my control. And then the things that were outside, I think, were just, again, leadership kind of identified an opportunity for us as an organization to grow. And I think they saw something in the way that I kind of engaged with other members of the team and really put me in a position to start leading. And from there, I just really, I loved it. And I learned a ton and always tried to iterate and evolve.
Okay, it's cool. That was, wonderful story and kind of backdrop. I want to ask a couple questions, dig a little deeper here. Because one of the things you said was you're always, you understood the product, of course, but you're always doing research and focusing on how to get more knowledge and awareness so that you could communicate the value of your product better, ultimately helping, perform your function better. So I'm curious, were you innately passionate about the advertising space? Was it something that you would have researched even if you hadn't been working there? Or was this something where you recognized that as part of, getting better at your role, you had to do the research and become curious about it anyways?
Somewhere in between. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say that I was passionate about advertising. And for me, it was really, again, that opportunity. I really wanted to seize this opportunity to contribute to building a company and a product. And it was just fascinating to me. And I became addicted. And when you really love working with the people you're working with, and when you really love building a product, regardless of your kind of obsession with that product or not, you become kind of obsessed. The learning piece was really just, again, it was kind of like I mentioned from the segment days, it was genuine curiosity. I wanted to figure out how to better position things. I wanted to figure out if our customers need something and there's some value they're trying to achieve and unlock, how can I help them unlock that faster, better, more effectively? How can I help them then showcase internally at their organizations the value that they're getting and they're driving? All of that to me was a really interesting problem that, it was a nut that a lot of people weren't able to crack. And I was kind of obsessed with figuring out, well, how do we showcase that? And that's, again, this was 2010, 11 time period. It's not that customer success did not exist, but we weren't calling it customer success at that company, and a lot of others weren't calling it. But that's the kind of root of what customer success really eventually became and was for me from like a philosophical perspective, is how do I overcome this challenge of showcasing value and helping other people then ultimately showcase their value. So those were things that I was genuinely trying to like learn and figure out different approaches and strategies on how I could better our customers' experience with us.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting parallel between the world of customer success and the world of leadership, right? What you just said there is you were, insanely curious about how to showcase the value of your product to help other people, your customers in this case, showcase the value of their work. And if we look at this from a leadership perspective, right, leaders have to be genuinely curious about how to showcase the value that they have and that they bring, but to help others, the people on their team, showcase their value to the organization, to their clients, to those things. Curious for your thoughts on that parallel here between CS and leadership.
It's so important. I think especially that last part that you tapped into, to me is something that I always want to get better and better at is empowering the people on my team to get their own visibility within the organization, and I think that's what a good leader typically aims to do. People talk about, a good leader supports their team, they'll have their back. And I think that unintentionally, something that's true, but unintentionally at times that then becomes, well, I need to go to bat for them and I need to go speak on their behalf behind closed doors. And there are times where that's really necessary. But I find it more interesting and more important to say, great, if by going to bat for you is really getting out of the way and making sure that the company sees what Mark is doing or what Lisa is doing or what Patrick is doing. I want the people that I work with and that I'm, kind of ultimately accountable for. I want them to get the exposure so that they can kind of take on more and more responsibilities. The benefit is they grow, they learn, they take more and more of the responsibilities that I have so that I can kind of take a step back and I could start focusing on other things so that I can grow and maybe even take over elements of what my boss or manager is doing. It's kind of circle of life, almost a bit cyclical, right? Where it's like, as I grow, I allow other people on my team to grow. And then if I'm growing into, taking over for responsibilities for my leadership, they can grow and kind of take on more for themselves. So hopefully everybody kind of wins in that scenario.
Yeah. And, that win-win, the classic cliche of having a win-win, it 100% applies. And but it can only be achieved or, even remotely achieved if the mindset is right, like you just described, that I want them to be successful, not I want me to be successful, right? And it's that mindset shift that we always have to be conscious of. Because when we're individual contributors, we control everything. It's all about us. It's all about our performance, right? My retention number, my quota number, or whatever it was. I made President's Club. I didn't. It's all in your control. But then as a leader, it's no longer about you. It's about this group of people, 1 or 10 or 500, doesn't matter. But it's about making them successful. So I'm curious, any experiences that you've had where that's been your approach, where you've been working towards empowering the team to take additional responsibilities, get additional exposure, have the opportunity to take on more projects and things. And perhaps people weren't ready for that next step or didn't see the world in the same way that, I don't really want to be going 24/7, just like everybody else here is. I'm curious how you've handled that kind of a situation, because I know it comes up from time to time.
Yeah, I think, that certainly has happened a number of times, right? Where maybe I'm a little bit more ambitious about offering and empowering than the person is, or maybe the person's just not ready for it. And I think an important way to either prevent that misalignment from happening, or if it happened, then to address it, is just through it's sheer communication. It's being open and honest. And that's another kind of, I suppose, pillar of good leadership, in my opinion, is being very transparent about what it is you're trying to accomplish and what the shared goals might be. And listening and just hearing, is that the same as what your the person on the other end of the conversation is trying to accomplish? So in the event where like you described, situations where people were not on the same page as me, that's a failure on my side. I could have and should have gone out of my way to make sure that we were on the same page. So you sit down together and you talk it out, and hey, my objective here was really kind of provide more visibility for you. And I wanted you to be empowered to go have these conversations with executives or with, the product org, instead of having to lean on me the whole time. Is that something, I should have asked you, is that something that you're interested in? Is that something that you want from your own growth, from your own exposure? And if the answer is yes, then okay, I'm glad we're on the same page with that. Let's talk about ways that we can facilitate that, because I might have ideas that make you feel good or maybe make you feel uncomfortable. What are your ideas? How have you seen this, or how would you like to go about this? And really just find some kind of middle ground for what might work really well, and still hopefully stretch the person, get them a little out of their comfort zone too, without doing it with assumptions. So it's it boils back down to these are conversations that we should all be having regularly, but realistically, we don't have it regularly always, right? If you can and you do, that's awesome. But it's okay to realize sometimes you get caught up in the day-to-day and you're really trying to move fast and you forget. Just call that out, be honest about it, and reset together.
Yeah, that's tremendous points. Recognizing that the way that you approach the world as a leader and the way you approach the world as a leader coming up through the ranks, perhaps even if you did the role that the team is in right now, might be different from somebody else's objective, personal preference, career plans, goals, anything, literally,
And comfort
right?
zone too.
And comfort zone. Yeah. And comfort zone. You see it as, okay, well, we work in these environments. This is what is really required to be successful. So I want to make you successful like this. Even if you're not telling them the directive of you have to do this XYZ, we can implicitly set the expectation that that is what it takes to, advance and whatnot. It might be completely contrary to what the other person has in store or even wants to deal with in their career. I think it's a really great point to bring it back to, it comes down to communication, and it comes down to asking, and it comes down to being curious, and it comes down to just laying on the cards on the table and saying, I don't know. I do know one thing, that my job, a big part of my job, is to help ensure that you're successful.
Yeah.
How can I best do that? Right? Yep. It's as simple as that kind of a question, but oftentimes, as you noted, we get caught up in the day-to-day, and it doesn't always happen. So are there particular checkpoints that you have or things that you've put in place yourself to make sure that time doesn't go too far before you have one of those checkpoints or one of those conversations?
Yeah, I do. And it really, I'll tell you, the way I employ those kind of check-ins, checkpoints is different for different people. I'm a firm believer that there is no one size fits all approach. What works for me might not work for a different leader, and then what works with me and one particular teammate of mine might not work with another teammate, right? Because again, everybody's a little bit different in their perspective, their needs, their wants, their stage of their career, etc. So some of the things that I do try to employ, with some of the folks who we're just on exactly the same page, they know exactly what they want. Maybe from a long-term perspective, but they don't know how to get there necessarily in the near term. What should I be doing? What do I need exposure to? Those types of scenarios, I really do try to kind of, let's put a firm, every 3 months or every 4 months, we'll carve it into the calendar. It's there. We know it's coming. We'll remind each other a week out so we can really come prepared and think about that, right? Yep. For somebody who isn't thinking in that mindset, who isn't I know what I want and this is exactly, the direction I want to go in, they might be just more interested in, hey, look, there's a number of different things I'm trying to do right now that I want exposure to so that I can get a taste of these different opportunities and initiatives. And that'll ultimately, build my tool chest so that I can eventually figure out what I want to do.
Yeah. And
for those types of people who are a little bit more, hey, let me think about the short term and eventually we'll get to a long term, adding the structure of a specific date in on the calendar, it can feel forced.
Yes.
So for those types of folks, I just keep it on my own side, a little reminder. Again, it's the same idea. It's still a calendar reminder every 3 months, maybe 4 months, but it's really so that I can more casually come in and say, hey, I've noticed you've really, these 5 different things that you wanted to get exposure to. I've noticed that you've really accelerated in these two in particular. Let's just chat about that. How are you feeling? You're accelerating because you're just naturally gifted and good at that? Or is that something you've really been putting forth more effort in? These other areas that we talked about a few months ago, are those things that you just haven't had an opportunity yet? Is there anything I can do to help unblock on that front? And then let the conversation naturally evolve. I think for again, people in that position, they will either identify that nope, still not interested in these things, but appreciate the opportunity. I'm moving on to the next thing. Yep. Or they might start to say, yeah, this is really interesting to me. And at that point, we get to move a little bit closer towards, well, great. Here are some ideas that I have. And here, maybe we can start exposing you to more, if it's they're working with product all of a sudden. Yeah. And that's the direction that they're yeah, this feels really good. Great. Moving forward, here are some initiatives that we're working on now that I would love for you to kind of lead on so that I'll step away. I'll be there to support you. Or maybe those opportunities don't exist yet, but I'm going to go talk to our VP of product or our product directors and say, hey, look, as opportunities for our teams to collaborate come up, let me know, so-and-so over here on the team, I think has a lot of promise and I would love to give them that exposure and opportunity to collaborate with you. So again, it's a little bit of a different tact, but it's the same thing in mind from my perspective. I need to be on top of it. Yeah. And the final thing, I know I've been kind of rambling here a little bit, but the final thing that I think is also critical that a lot of people don't realize, and I had to go through a learning kind of curve on this myself. it's not just the manager who should be thinking about and doing these things, right? It's really a two-way street.
Yes.
It's the two-way communication is really important. So if somebody is in a position on my team that I'm working with, or if myself, it's really important to let your leader know, here's what I'm thinking about as far as career progression, and here are the things that I'm interested in, and hopefully you have that trust and that kind of confidence together that you can express that without fear of any repercussion, right? I've had plenty of people who I've worked with who want to get into marketing or engineering or product. That doesn't faze me. I want to help facilitate that. If you're in an environment where that's kind of frowned upon, because why don't you want to stay in CS?
Yeah.
You might want to reassess that situation.
Right. Oh, excellent points. And I think that ownership piece, well, two key things that I pulled away from what you were just talking about. Number one is the fact that everybody's different, and there are different texts and different approaches and different paces, even when it comes to development and growth and exposure to opportunities. There is no one size fits all. And if you try to mandate the one size fits all, it's say every quarter we're going to sit down and do this and this, and it puts too much pressure to the point where somebody doesn't want to do it, then you kind of negatively impacted their view of their own development, and probably a little bit negative view on working with you as a leader, because you're not listening, you're not understanding where they're at, not meeting them where they are. So I love that while you're keeping track of it on your side, you're approaching it with each individual in a different way to meet them where they are. Some more aggressive, some a little bit less aggressive. Ultimately, the same end result's happening, right? The conversation's happening, the exposure's happening, but it's just happening on a different path that is appropriate for each individual person. So I love what you said there about that. On the not just the manager driving this piece, I couldn't agree with you more. The phrase I use all the time is every individual is the CEO of his or her career. There's only one person in the world who can make the call on what's right for them in their career, in their growth, in their learning, in their development, in their execution of their job, whatever level they're in, and it's them. That's the best part. It's you, Sam. It's me for my business and my life. It's everybody else, right? And if everybody begins to view themselves as CEO of their career, then all of a sudden you take a completely different approach to how can I leverage Sam? How can I leverage Mezmo to help me achieve what I want to achieve? How can I get their help? Instead of coming and perhaps asking, what should I do? Where can I go? What can I be promoted to? Right. So curious for your take on that. Does that align with your philosophy as well? And, how you approach from that side, helping them to realize that the decisions are really in their hands. They're not in yours.
I love that. I love the way you articulated that. I think that certainly resonates with me and makes perfect sense. We are all more in control of that kind of like ultimate destiny than I think we realize. And I've personally gone through the curve on that front. Like, I think I earlier in my career was excited to grow and progress and gain more scope and responsibility, but I was waiting. I was like, oh, okay, like I'm doing all these great things in my head and I'm waiting for you, my boss, to tell me, all right, you're promoted now. Like, but it doesn't always work like that, right? So I think as far as how I help ensure that my team, I guess, kind of adopts that philosophy, or at least recognizes that is a really good one. I do my best to provide examples. Like, again, it's straight communication. When we have these opportunities, I'm going to call out certain things if they're doing things really well. Steve on my team here at Mezmo, he made it clear with me at some point that one of the things very early on in our relationship that he was really excited to jump into leadership at some point. And I thanked him. The moment he told me that, I thanked him and said, I appreciate you telling me this, because now it's something that I think about. Too often people assume that I would already have known that he wanted to be in leadership, but Steve really took it upon himself to make it clear, this is what I want to do. And then really digging in and asking, some questions. Why? What is it about leadership in particular that's exciting for you? Obviously, career progression is great. Everybody's excited about that. But what in particular? And just, again, it's opportunities for me to learn so that in the future, I can point to either examples of things that he's doing that put him on that path so that he can be conscious of that moving forward, or areas of opportunity for him to grow. These are things that I haven't yet seen from you simply because I either wasn't aware or, and thanks again for telling me, or you just haven't had the opportunity yet. Let's now carve out that opportunity so that you can showcase to yourself and get those kind of reps in, that repetition, that exposure, so that you are prepared when the time and opportunity presents itself. And the other piece of that, that I'm always honest about with the people I work with, I'm going to do everything I can. Once we get that communication and we're aligned on what it is you're trying to get done or the areas that you're interested in, I'm going to do everything I can. Selfishly, I want it to be here within, the organization I'm working in directly. Second, selfishly from that is within at least the company we work in. I'm going to find those opportunities. But realistically, opportunities aren't always going to work out that way, where we get to continue to work together, either in the capacity of our department or our organization, our company. I'm also going to make sure that you are building your experience and your kind of tool chest again, so that should an opportunity present itself outside of the organization and company that we're working in, you are prepared, you're ready to go. And I tell them that. I encourage that. I even go as far to encourage them. I think everybody, especially these days, is getting outreach from LinkedIn and, hey, there's this opportunity, we think you'd be a great fit, et cetera. Once a year or every 9 to 16 months, whatever it is, take a conversation, see what's out there. You might learn something that's really good for you, and then come back and let me know. And maybe I haven't been thinking about that here, and we should be doing that here. Or maybe it's something you want to pursue. It's not, again, at the end of the day, it's all about you. Selfishly, I want to work with you forever, but that's why we're working here together. But it's important to be honest about that stuff, so that people feel comfortable then coming to one another and kind of exploring what's really feasible. Otherwise, you're working off of assumptions. And that's you're creating your own narrative, and that's a dangerous path to go down.
I agree 100%. And one of the most taboo subjects that exists in our B2B professional world is that of leaving a company for another opportunity. And I used to do the same thing with all the teams that I ran, where it was like, listen, my job is to make sure you are successful. Whether that's here in this role, whether it's in another org, or whether it's in another company, doesn't really matter, because this is a long-term relationship here. I went into it thinking I would know these people for life, my entire life. Like, I don't want to just know them for the 1, 2, or 3 years I work at one particular company. I want to have a lifelong relationship with these people because they're genuinely great people, right? And there was always usually a little bit of hesitation, because some people had some, previous experiences where they went out, they did the diligence, and they got an offer from the other one and came back and gave their 2 weeks notice and were told and literally escorted out of the building as soon as they handed in the resignation. And they said, "You're dead to us," essentially was the response. And it's like, well, I don't want to be part of that experience again. So I'm never going to tell my manager anything. And if it's something that bad happens, I've already have the other job lined up. But the fear is, if I tell my manager I'm thinking about another opportunity, they might just escort me out of the building, or, virtual building in these days. So I think it's so important to establish that level of trust and relationship. And it's only going to come from being genuine, right? You can't make this stuff up. You be like, I'm really here to support you. But if somebody leaves this team, there's going to be a lot to answer for.
We're not talking anymore and anything like that. I think what you're saying makes so much sense. Like, I love, people talk about, especially in the startup environment, right? They talk about like company and the team as a family and things that can kind of cross different boundaries. And it really depends on what you mean by that. But I think what I've always interpreted that as is like, these are the people that I really do want to be around. And I really am interested in their success. And I hope that long term, whether that success is here or elsewhere, there's opportunities to partner again down the road. And like, you don't want to, the best way to facilitate that is, like we said earlier, to be genuine and to really care and to really want them to be successful. And it's not just because I need to hit a metric or to be, mitigate churn and have that number be great. And, that's hopefully the output of us working together and us, empowering one another and all the visibility stuff that we discussed earlier, and the churn stuff from a success perspective or retention, that's a great output. But it really, it takes a lot of effort to really build that environment and that kind of culture, I suppose, and those sets of values, like those are all really important kind of ingredients.
Yeah. And it starts with you, the leader. That's it. That's the best. That's the buck stops there.
Yeah.
Like we cannot, even if our company culture is not perfect thing we would love, it, has its flaws. Every company does. It's okay. But we can control our team, right? We can control the culture that we build within this group of people that we're working with, because guess what? You're together more than any other group.
Yeah.
And as long as you can focus on what you can control, you can create an incredible environment, even if you're in the middle of what might feel like chaos around the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Sam, last question here. Let's say you knew everything you know today, but you could go back in time and sit down with your younger self, early stage of career, perhaps getting into that first leadership position, and maybe leading up to that at the advertising company. What advice would you share with your younger self?
It's a great question. A ton of different, kind of small pieces of advice. It's
usually at this point where ideas flood.
There's so many things, right? I would say, like, maybe the two biggest pieces of advice that kind of go hand in hand is don't worry about mistakes so much. Like, leverage those mistakes to learn. I now know that. I love that. I always preach that with my team. Now, if you're making the exact same mistake over and over, we should talk about why that is. But being comfortable with failure and leveraging that failure to learn. I mean, it's kind of cliche, I suppose, but it's really true. Like when you're early in your career, at least when I was early in my career, I was terrified when I failed. I thought that the hammer was going to drop, and now I love it. Yep. It's just I love it, and I highlight it for people because it's important that people know that it's okay. Especially when you're growing really fast, you can't. We have this kind of concept here of speed over perfection. It's like an iteration of maybe move fast and break stuff, I suppose. Not as hardcore maybe, but speed over perfection. We're all trying to do a great job, and we know that this is the perfect ideal, output we want. But it's really, really more critical at times. Just move quickly and then iterate as best as possible. So I think it's the same concept, right? Be okay with failure. The other piece that I think kind of goes alongside with that is, and it's back to what we were saying earlier. I think finding the problems that exist out there, I think it's really important. I was stumbling into them and not able to really articulate them well, but I think if I had more intentionality behind, here are the 6 different problems I'm seeing. Now let me confirm which of these align with our business goals, which of them align really well with that. And then if I don't know, go to your leadership and find out, hey, I should know these, but maybe we haven't talked about them. What are the specific business goals? Because I've got these problems here and I want to help prioritize how to address those problems, but I know that I can't do all of them at once. I think back then I was really what is it? There's a bunch of burning fires and I'm trying to put them all out at once, and you just can't. Nobody's got the bandwidth to do a great job across all of those. So I think if I could go back and really better understand, hey, these are the problems. This is how it aligns to the business, the outcomes that we're trying to drive as an organization. For those reasons, I'm going to focus on these top 2 and do a really great job executing on them, or as best as I can. It took me a long time to understand that and then ultimately be comfortable with that. So anything I could have done, if I could go back in time and tell myself to, a little bit to get to that point a little bit quicker, I think that would have been very helpful.
Love it. Wonderful advice, hard-earned wisdom. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise, stories, getting to talk about segment in the early days. One of my, I just got rid of it not too long ago. I held on to it for a long time, but the analytics.js is my favorite rapper shirt. Any segment person out there knows what that was. I had one of those when the earliest days when they were in just this little tiny shoebox of an office. They gave it to me as a thank you for coming over and talking to CS as the group. And it always meant so much to me. So it was fun to talk a little bit of segment history with you.
That thing is a collector's item. I'm sure you can
no doubt. I wish I had held on to it for longer.
If you need it. No.
I know. It totally is. Totally should be. All right, Sam. Well, thanks so much for spending time with me. Take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me. It was great catching up.